Meta did it. The Zuck did it. Finally, they released ultimately the biggest open source large language model that is practically beating the big boys like GPT, Claude, and Gemini in their own game, and it's all open source and it can be run at a fraction of the cost. Of course, there's loads of coverage about that. I'm sure you heard about it by now, but I really feel they're underestimating how big deal this is. So much so, I think, in fact, this is the first nail of the coffin of the commercial large language models. Let's get after it. Those who follow me and follow this channel, you know that I'm a big critic of Meta because of all of the privacy issues over the years. And, I'm somewhat also critic of the Zuck, although I don't know him personally, obviously, but he's been a little bit cavalier about it, right, over the years. But that's a very different story. It has nothing to do with this particular video because I give credit where credit is due. I believe very strongly in open source. I've been doing this since the 90s. Open source for me is always the way forward when it comes to software. And I don't care about people who argue that, what about security? What about safety? Every single time there's an open source project, you get exactly the same arguments against open source using exactly the same nonsense. Yet eventually everybody goes and opts in for open source. We've seen that with Linux. We've seen that pretty much with everything that Google has created practically. A lot of the products that they have is open source and indeed free as well. So I'm a huge believer that large language models need to be open source. And in fact, OpenAI, they actually started off as an open source and a charity as well. Until, of course, ka-ching, right? Sometimes money changes people, apparently. But back to Meta. I think what they've done here is truly extraordinary because we work with many organizations and we're starting also to work specifically with charitable organizations and government agency where money is a little bit tight. But of course, they need AI as well, like everybody else. And part of the business model that we have at Nebula, my company, is that we always offer affordable ecosystem that is still private, that still gives you access to any language model that you like through Nano, be it GPT or Claude or whatever, and indeed Llama as well. But cost is always a problem. It's always the issue. And the fact that Llama now can outperform GPT-4o in loads of different tasks, not in everything, and there's already information that online, and I've got all the links in the description for you guys as usual. So I don't want to go over that. I want to go over the argument I want to make in terms of why I think this is such a big deal, bigger deal than people seem to think. But the idea that we can now download something like Llama in our local servers or even on your local computer and practically run it for free, or they claim that the cost is about 50% less than what you would get with GPT, Claude, etc. So we are potentially talking, instead of paying thousands of dollars a month, you pay only a few $100s a month. I mean, that is a big deal. There's a letter that he published on Meta's website, and he highlighted a few points I want to share with you. I like the introduction that he pretty much likes to compare what they're trying to do at Meta with Linux. So he said here, for example, that eventually through open source, Linux gained popularity initially because it allowed developers to modify its code. However they wanted and was more affordable, and over time because it was more advanced, more secure, and had a broader ecosystem supporting more capabilities than any closed Unix. That's exactly the same case here with generative AI models. I mean, if you've got a closed model, so basically whatever OpenAI is doing, pretty much there's nothing else we can do. We're totally reliant on developers within OpenAI, perhaps Microsoft. We don't know what the arrangement is. The same thing with Google, same thing with Claude. And today, of course, as we all know, Linux is the industry standard foundation for both cloud computing and the operating systems that run most mobile devices. And I remember so clearly because I was supporting Linux and the whole open source movement way back in the day. And the arguments that you hear today, people going about, hackers and criminals going to steal the AI and they're going to use it for bad things. They said exactly the same thing about Linux, right? Now, where are these same people? What are they saying about Linux? Nothing. Crickets, right? Same thing will happen with AI, okay? But I like the list that he provided here. Again, you will be able to read this on your own. That why he believes open source is good for AI. So let's go through the list very quickly. He says that first, we need to train, fine tune, and distill our own models. So every organization should have the ability to do that with their own models. I fully agree. We need to control our own destiny and not get locked into a closed vendor. I agree. Although, arguably, you don't have to have open source for that. So, for example, the model that we're offering is that you're not locked into GPT or Claude or anything, but you can still have access to GPT, Claude, or whatever through our ecosystem. So you use our ecosystem that gives you the freedom to play around with whatever language model you want, including your own, including Llama, but you can still have access to GPT without committing to OpenAI. So you don't have to have open source to achieve that. But point taken is still a very good point. It is very important for any business or any person owning a project for you to be able to control your own AI. Absolutely fundamental. And the third thing, we need to protect our data. That's true, although Meta, talking about protecting data, okay, but good. As I said, I give credit where credit is due. And the fourth point here is that we need a model that is efficient and affordable to run. And he highlights here that it's basically the claim that it's 50% cheaper. But I think potentially it could be even more, depending on how you run the model. But based on some of the testing, I think this is the average costs that you can save, which is still, that's a big deal. 50% is a very big deal. Finally, it says that we want to invest in an ecosystem that's going to be the standard for the long term, effectively to be the Linux. Now, whether they're going to be the Linux or not, I don't know, maybe debatable, because the issue that we have with Llama is that we still don't know how they train their data. And one thing I am actually disappointed about this letter, that there's nothing in here that highlights how they train the data. So, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So the bottom line, as he highlighted here on this letter, that from what their direction is that open source AI represents the world's best shot at harnessing this technology to create the greatest economic opportunity and security for everyone. I agree. Again, kind of like Linux. Yeah. But I decided that I wanted to do a little bit of research where I wanted to see if any of the journalists from all of the big magazines managed to get sort of any sort of insider information on if there's any kind of hint of how they trained Llama. And again, they're not getting anything anywhere with anybody. So we still don't know how they trained Llama. And for me, you can't claim that something is open source if you don't know where the data came from, right? Kind of like with Linux, right? The original Linux. Everybody, like everything was out there, right? So it was a lot easier for us to control it, test it, enhance it, manipulate it. That's the whole point of open source. But the thing is about AI, one of the key things that we advocate with my company, and many other people do the same, is explainable AI. Now, for those who don't know, explainable AI is where you have the ability to track the reasoning behind the output generated by the AI. Because the problem with AI output, you can't reverse it. Once it's out there, it's out there. That's it. So once it comes up with an output, once it creates a decision, it's very important to understand how it came up with that decision. And once you track that and you find where the problem comes from, most of the time comes from the data, then you need to figure out, well, which data set caused this? Potentially, what is the source of the data? So if we have zero understanding of the source of the data, then this thing can't be explainable enough. And in my opinion, it's not open source enough, which is the reason why I understand the point he's making in terms of that, yes, it's like Linux and this is kind of the direction they want to push. Perhaps they'll do it in the future. I don't know. But where we are today, this is not Linux. Okay? Not enough. For me, that's my critique. I don't think this can be claimed to be open source enough. However, it's definitely the right move in the right direction, 100%. And I have to commend Meta for this. I mean, we should all do. But I did find an interesting article from The Verge where they managed to get hold of somebody that kind of gave a very interesting insight. So here's the article from The Verge. And again, they go into a little bit of more detail as well. Again, it's in the description. The link is in the description for you guys. And they go into a lot of the technical details. And, I can tell you a lot of businesses don't care about these things, but it's there if you're interested. But And they confirmed that, unsurprisingly, Meta isn't saying much about the data it used to train Llama 3.1. The people who work at AI companies say they don't disclose this information because it's a trade secret. Well, then it's not open source. Okay, I mean, let's just put it that way. And the other point they're making, that critics like myself say that it is a tactical to delay the inevitable onslaught of copyright lawsuits that are coming. And they are coming. And talking of which, I do have an episode coming in the next, actually, I think, couple of episodes from now, where I am bringing an expert, a legal expert, that will actually discuss in detail all of the issues of copyright in relation to large language models and actually generative AI as a whole. Because, guys, we get a lot of messages, and feel free, put your comments below or send us a DM on LinkedIn. You can also you can email us directly as well. It's editors@aigeeks.com with any of the questions that you have. But one of the biggest questions and concerns that we get from artists, business owners, scientists, is what happens once they start uploading and publishing their content online. They worry that these models, or rather these companies, would use their data to train these models unlawfully. So I am bringing a legal expert who specializes in this area specifically in the next couple of episodes. So make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell so you'll be notified once this episode is out. I know this guy very, very well. He knows absolutely what he's talking about. So you do not want to miss that one. But they're absolutely right here. There will be an onslaught when it comes to copyright. This is definitely the Achilles heels of large language models today. And it's brewing. And there's a reason, of course, why, and I've got another video coming up about this, why the big VCs in Silicon Valley decided to go MAGA. Now, Kamala Harris, of course, is the nominee for the Democrats. And whether they're going to backtrack, Elon Musk apparently is starting to backtrack as well. But we'll see. But the point is, VCs are very much against this. They actually went very publicly and quite in a silly manner saying that, well, you know what, we don't need to worry about copyright because, we must think about the future of these companies. Think about these companies, think about these startups, forget copyright. Let's carry on stealing content from other people. Really. Yeah, I would like to actually find out what companies that their portfolio companies think about their VCs just went MAGA. This is why we don't have shareholders with my company. I'm free. We've got the freedom to innovate. I've got the freedom to share with you this sort of information. So anyway, I digress. So what The Verge have done here, they got a hold of Meta's VP of Generative AI, Ahmed Al-Dahli, and he says that he predicts that Llama 3.1 will be popular with developers as, quote unquote, a teacher for smaller models that are then deployed in a more cost-effective way, which is basically the case with open source. But the interesting thing the journalist has said is that when he asked if Meta agrees with the growing consensus that the industry is running out of quality training data for AI models, this guy suggests there is a ceiling coming. Interesting. Though it may be farther out than some think. He says, we definitely think we have a few more training runs, but it's difficult to say. That's an interesting statement. Because if they've already identified that they're hitting a ceiling, there's already quite a lot of research papers that have been published that challenge this whole idea of building AGI, where they're saying that we have nowhere near enough data to achieve anything close to AGI. Like, no matter what. Even if you create endless amounts of synthetic data with trillions of parameters, endless of parameters, it's still not going to be enough. So to me, if they know that there's a ceiling, I suppose they'll claim that they trained it with synthetic data. Now, we work with synthetic data. I'm telling you, it's not easy to build a model of this size that beats GPT with purely synthetic data. Again, I want to see the evidence of that. I would like to see the evidence of that. But I can't see how that's not possible. That's not possible. So where did they get the data from? I guess the obvious source is all of the social media platforms they have. Facebook, Instagram, maybe WhatsApp. I don't know. That's why I don't like using WhatsApp. just FYI. But seriously, it's quite obscure how they trained Llama. Nonetheless, this is definitely a move in the right direction. And let me tell you why I think this is the first nail in the coffin of commercial language models. If you recall, I made a prediction way early this year, like in January, that I believe Apple will be the company that is going to take over the AI market. Why? Because the way I see it, from the consumer, the biggest issue that consumers have with AI is privacy. And the only way you can deal with a privacy issue is to have on-device AI. And the best companies that can achieve that are indeed Apple, obviously, with the iPhone, and Samsung. The point that Mark Zuckerberg made throughout this announcement and some of the other interviews is the fact that one of the reasons why Meta can afford to do this, because they're not reliant on selling cloud solutions. So in other words, they don't really, it makes no difference to them whether or not they charge for Llama, because they're not selling Llama. They're not selling the shovels, as it were, right? But they're building it as a way of enhancing their existing platforms, right? Their social media, all of their products. They're going to use Llama apparently in Quest as well. So this is kind of their investment to enhance their existing products. They're not selling it as a new product, right? It's a framework that other companies can use practically for free because you can just download it, or at a fraction of the cost of the commercial models. So they've got nothing to lose here, which is a very, very dangerous thing for companies like OpenAI, like Microsoft, like Anthropic, etc., who effectively sell generative AI models to make money. This is a big problem for them. This is a very dangerous problem. But let me go back to Apple. Why I said that Apple is going to dominate, because Apple is in exactly the same position. They can invest, and they have invested endless amount of money in building their own AI chips, in building their own AI algorithms, and indeed building their large language models. And effectively, it's available for free. You're not paying for the usage. You're not paying for tokens. Okay, for now, for the upcoming updates, you have to invest in the expensive, the upper end of the iPhone lineup. But that's always the start. They always do that. They always, everything, there's something major that is released in any, like in iOS or in the iPhone itself. It's always the Pro and Pro Max. And yeah, which I will get, and I will test it and share my opinions with you guys once it's up and running and it's available. But again, for them, they're not reliant on selling AI solutions or selling cloud solutions for anybody. They rely on selling iOS through their iPhones or macOS through their Macs. So in this case, they're basically using AI as a way of accessorizing their systems and empowering their systems with AI so that consumers can buy their products, can have better experience, better user interactions, etc., etc. They're not reliant on large language models to generate revenue whatsoever. And this is why I predicted that Apple is going to dominate, because effectively that is, a shot in the face at companies like Anthropic and OpenAI, because basically, how else are they making money? This is the only way they're making money. And as I said earlier, one of the biggest problems that our customers are facing, apart, of course, from privacy concerns, etc., which is the reason why they come to us, because we offer a completely different ecosystem. But the biggest problem they have, of course, is cost. It's the running cost of private servers with private installation of GPT or private installation of any other language model, commercial language model. You have to pay for it. This is absolutely revolutionary, because I mentioned earlier that we are starting to work with charities. One of the things, the beauty of not having shareholders is that we are prioritizing our mission over profits, meaning that we can be flexible with non-for-profit organizations. We advise the previous UK government, for example. We are working with a few charities already, and we are increasing our portfolio of charities around the world. And for us, it's really important that we bring responsible AI and safe AI models in the way that we do it at my company to as many organizations as we possibly can, effectively building this ecosystem from the ground up. And we cannot do it just selling to the rich companies and rich corporations. We need to support charities as well. So we are in a great position to do that. But of course, the the thing that always annoyed me is like, we have to pay a lot of money to host GPT for these guys. And basically they have kind of settled for, GPT 3.5 or, the smaller models of Llama or whatever. I mean, again, that works. I mean, for specific applications, it works perfectly fine. But if they want something bigger, something like GPT-4o, it would cost them an arm and a leg. And for a charity, that's a big problem. This, I think, for us, certainly from what I've read so far, we're still testing it. We haven't actually got into it properly yet. And we might actually test it with a couple of charity organizations that we're working with already. But this is absolutely revolutionary. This is absolutely revolutionary. And basically, as a business, if you can save 50% deploying your own AI models, or potentially if you already have your own server, you can just download this thing and install it on your own. Why the hell would you pay for GPT? That's a problem. This is how the bubble starts to explode. The bubble, and I've been through a few, the bubble starts to explode when the ROI, the return on your investment of whatever technology that you've paid for. Remember crypto? You spent lots of money on it, you got shit all. Once you're in the situation where you're investing a lot of money into a technology that does not give you a good return on the investment, but even worse, if there is an alternative that is practically free or 50% cheaper, you are in deep shit. You are in a deep shit. So it will be interesting to see how Microsoft reacts to this, because of course Microsoft have, for quite a long time now, they've been very much, developer friendly. This is developer friendly, and arguably it's way more developer friendly than GPT. I mean, there are rumors that Microsoft building their own language models. I don't know if it's going to be open source or not. I mean, I'm kind of not fully in touch with that particular story, but I will keep you guys updated because we have a relationship with Microsoft. So I didn't really look into it too much. But there are already rumors that Microsoft are kind of building their own kind of GPT-like model, which kind of raises the question, well, if they're doing that, why are they relying on OpenAI? I mean, what is the future of OpenAI and the future of companies like Anthropic? It's interesting. But this, mark my words, this is the first step towards the explosion of the current bubble. I know Meta knows this, and they've been very clever. And here's a prediction for you, right? I kind of decided to risk it because I don't like predicting. Usually, like every time you predict something, you look like a jackass. Thankfully, I got Apple thing right, but I think the Apple thing was a bit obvious. But I think now, because Apple, as I said earlier just now, that they are going to dominate the consumer market, the AI consumer market. And if the business market starts to figuring out how to use Llama, this new release of Llama, I'm sure there will be new releases as well. So the Llama 3.1 and the future releases of Llama, which of course, if this one is practically beating GPT, or is at least, let's say, on par with GPT, then eventually the next release will be even bigger than GPT, depending on what OpenAI is going to do next. I think if businesses figure this one out, why the hell would they pay for GPT? I mean, I wouldn't. Like I said, we work with charities, we work with government agencies. I'm not going to charge them for GPT if we can work with that. Of course, we have to test it and see if it's reliable for them. But if this turns out to be 50% cheaper or more, why the hell would we use GPT? We're not going to do that. We're not going to waste our money. So, could that potentially mean that Meta at least has set the pace now towards businesses and enterprises demanding open source language models? Businesses and enterprises going to Microsoft and say, guys, we want Llama. Okay, you can actually get Llama on Azure, on a private server, so that's fine. So potentially they'll start switching to that. Microsoft, of course, they've invested crazy amount of money on GPT, and of course there are rumors that they're building their own model. I'll be very surprised if they're not going to do that, if they're going to release it as an open source model. I mean, that would be crazy, actually. If Meta is doing it, Microsoft should be able to do it as well. Same thing with Google. So, interesting times, guys. Interesting times. But, salute to Meta and the Zuck. 100%. Absolutely, congratulations. Well done. Like I said, I'm probably biased because I support open source, obviously. Although, like I said, in my opinion, it's not open source enough. Meta still pretty much owns it. For me, open source means that it has to be owned by the people. It needs to be a lot more decentralized. That's truly open source. But, you never know. The future is still pretty bright. But my guys, here's my prediction. This is the first step towards the death of commercial LLMs. And of course, Apple will come in. Meta now decided to come in aggressively, focusing on saving businesses crazy amount of money on large language models. So potentially, Meta could be the one that is dominate the business market with generative AI, whilst Apple dominate the consumer market with generative AI. What happens to the rest? We shall see. But I think OpenAI are absolutely worried about this. This is bad news for them. It's bad news, not just OpenAI, but any commercial LLM or commercial generative AI system. This is very, very dangerous and bad news for them. But certainly for us, that's great news. For our customers, it's the best news. And on that note, as usual, guys, I welcome your thoughts. Do you think that this is a problem for the commercial market? Hit me in the discussion below. And again, as usual, if you have any questions, you've got any concerns, you want me to invite specific guests to the podcast, I've got a phenomenal guest coming in the next podcast, coming in a couple of days actually. So again, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Have a great end of the summer soon. Enjoy yourselves. Stay safe. Peace.